Welcome to this week's GCN Tech Clinic, where we answer the cycling related questions that you've submitted using the hashtag AskGCNTech. So let's kick off this week with our first question, which comes from CycleQ, who asks, I've been using Shimano Claris on their first road bike and it's performed very well this year, clocking up lots of miles or kilometres on Strava rides, but the left gear shifter, which is for the front derailleur, is quite difficult to shift now and has become rather painful. Is it possible to upgrade to electronic shifting from a bike that was fitted with Shimano's Claris 8-speed group set? Thanks very much. Well, good job, you got into cycling and clocking up lots of kilometres, that's great to hear, but if your left-hand shifter is very tricky to move and is becoming quite painful, the chances are it's going to be the inner cable has become quite worn and also the outer cable housing as well. So it could be quite a simple job to replace that most bike shops will be able to do for very little cost. But if you really wanted to upgrade to electronic group set, then chances are your frame won't be specifically designed for that and it's going to be particularly expensive. So my best bit of advice would be to get the cable changed first, then that should sort out your gear shift lever that will change nice and easily again. But if you're really set on having electronic shifting, then my advice would be save a bit of money up and maybe invest in a second-hand bike that comes with electronic shifting already installed. Next up, we've got Cadu Slayers with their question. Says, can I use a heavy-duty industrial degreaser, which is used for car engines, on their drivetrain? Also, could they use isopropyl alcohol as a degreaser, or is that too light? Well, you could use both of those degreasers, although they're not specifically intended for cleaning bike components. But if you wanted to clean your chain with those, then I would suggest removing the chain first, and then you would be okay, because both of those could be very strong cleaners, and you do run the risk of damaging some of the components, and especially run the risk of damaging the paintwork on your bike. So my best advice would be to use a bike-specific degreaser, but if you haven't got access to that, these degreasers that you've suggested would work, but take the components off the bike first and then give them a thorough clean afterwards to get rid of any degreaser. Next up is from Saksham Wadwa. Interesting. Says, they're a beginner cyclists and have Shimano Sora road bike and want to upgrade. What should they go for? Should they go for a better frame or upgrade their group set? They've only got enough budget to do one of those. They can't do both the group set and the frame. It's a bit of a tricky question, this, and something that we get asked quite a lot here on GCN Tech, but my advice would be to upgrade the frame set first. It would seem silly to replace the group set components when they weren't worn out. So get the most out of your group set components first and then upgrade your frame, and you can use those components on the new frame. And when you've got chance and the budget allows, you can upgrade to your new group set and then you have effectively a new bike. Perfect. Next question in from Phil NEC. Says, hey guys, what are the difference between a budget bib short of about 60 euros and a high-end bib short, which is 200 euros or more? Is the difference really worth it? And will you be able to tell? So some of the differences between the expensive bib shorts, it tends to be the chamois and pad material is one of the main differences between the two shorts. The cheaper shorts will have a thinner pad in them, which won't maybe last quite so long and won't be quite so comfortable on long rides. So it will be worth investing in the best shorts that you can for your money. Some of the other differences are the fit of the shorts, the materials that they're made from, and the breathability of them. It is worth noting that even though some bib shorts look very expensive on the face of it, they will last significantly longer than some of the cheaper options. So it's worth just weighing up whether you want to spend a little bit of money and get the expensive bib shorts, or if you just want to save your money and invest it in other bike components. Our next question is from Anton Angelo Arvallo. Good name. And their question is, aside from the chain wear indicators, what are the signs and indicators that it's time to replace your chain rings and rear cogs or cassette? Is it true that when you change your chain, you also need to change those components too? So, first part of your question, the way to tell that the cassette and chain rings are worn is the teeth will become very sharp and lose their edge to them. So then they'll also become quite hooked and rounded where the chain has worn away at those components. So that's the easiest way to tell for the chain ring and the cassette. And your other question, no, you don't need to change all of these components when you replace the chain. Sure, if your chain has become incredibly worn out and you've carried on using it for a long time, then chances are it's going to have worn the chain rings and the cassette too. But if you maintain your chain correctly and replace it at the correct time when you need to, then you should get multiple chains to be used with that cassette and the chain rings. So you should get plenty of life out of those components just by changing the chain regularly when you need to do so and maintaining it well. Our next question is from Jaden Chamberlain. And their question is, on the bikes of the Tour de France riders, do they use electric or manual gears? Interesting one that, because over the last few years we've seen most teams switch across to using electronic gear shifting, and that's because most manufacturers' top tier group sets now come in electronic shifting options as well as mechanical. Although there are a small number of teams in the Tour de France that still use mechanical shifting. It tends to be the slightly smaller teams with the lesser budgets. I can't remember the names of a couple of the teams, but I do remember last year there was definitely one that was using even Ultegra level group sets. So whilst most teams use electronic shifting, there are still the teams out there that use mechanical. And our last question for this week, it comes from IP Thor 23CKY. Not sure I've said that in the best way, but their question is, something is bothering them recently and they need a bit of advice. I have a Ridley Cheetah TT bike from 2010 and they've bought themselves a 62 tooth chainring with a 47 tooth chainring. They'd like to install them, but the issue is these huge chain rings just won't fit on their bike because it's not designed to be used with anything bigger than a 56 tooth chain ring. What's the solution for fitting the 62 tooth chain ring? Do I have to use a type of spacers? Should I convert my TT bike into a single ring setup? Definitely doesn't want to buy a new bike, but is prepared to drill holes in the frame to fit the front derailleur higher up. So, fitting large chain rings onto a time trial bike, it can be a common problem that you find the front derailleur won't sit correctly within the frame. So there are companies out there that have designed a bracket specifically for this. So you attach the bracket onto the frame and then you attach the front derailleur onto the bracket and it moves the whole system slightly higher up to allow space for those large chain rings. Many riders that are using large chainrings on time trials though do convert their bike to a single chainring setup because it is far more efficient and aerodynamic. So you do have that option. If you maybe going to ride on particularly flat time trials, then you won't need to use the dual chainring setup. So that could be a useful option for you, but otherwise you're going to have to find one of these helpful brackets and attach that to your bike, and that should sort out your problem. I definitely would not recommend drilling your frame and trying to move the front derailleur mount higher up the frame. That sounds like a recipe for disaster, and I feel like you might damage your frame somewhat. So invest in the bracket if you want to keep a 2x setup, and if you want to use a single chainring, simple problem, you don't have to change the front derailleur. Easy going. That finishes this week's GCN Tech Clinic. I hope those have been helpful answers, and keep your questions coming using the hashtag AskGCNTech, and we'll work our way through and hopefully get to them next week. Thanks very much.